Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. Today we're going to be looking at a subscriber request who asked that I combine the Great Old One Warlock with the Wizard class. Now they didn't specify what kind of wizard, they just asked for a Great Old One Warlock, but that's okay, we'll look at some different wizard options as we go on through the video. Now I want to say up front that from a damage dealing combat optimization standpoint, this isn't going to be the strongest character. Obviously, if you're going Wizard and Warlock, you have competing main casting stats. The Wizard needs intelligence, the Warlock needs charisma, and it's just going to be hard to max them both out compared to, say, like a Warlock Sorcerer combo where they're both using charisma. And the Sorcerer would allow you to do things like quicken cast an Eldritch Blast while also casting a regular Eldritch Blast in the same round. So from like a damage standpoint, you're not going to be as strong. However, there's more to the game than just damage. And I really, if your gaming table is anything like some of the ones I've been at, you've got like that barbarian who's got his great weapon and he's going to go use reckless attack with great weapon mastery and just try to do as much damage as possible. But you've also got a fighter and he's got a polearm with polearm mastery, sentinel, and great weapon mastery. And then you've also got a ranger who took the archery fighting style, and of course he has sharpshooter. And everybody else in the party is just built to do as much damage in combat as possible, which by the way is fine. I'm not trying to rip on any of those type of things. I love optimized characters of any sort, including combat machines. I've done multiple videos about those types of characters. I'm not saying that's bad. In fact, normally if you die in Dungeons & Dragons, you died in combat, not out of combat. So there's nothing wrong with those types of characters. But it's also really frustrating when nobody in your party can make an investigation roll, or nobody in your party is good at anything that doesn't have to do with hitting something with a weapon. And you can do that with this type of character really, really well. So that's kind of what we're looking to play. We're going to be like this Occult Investigator, that Call of Cthulhu style type of character, right? And I think that's a great fit for the Great Old One anyways, right? Very thematic, they go nicely together. What are my in-laws doing? It sounds like they're singing karaoke while moving or something. I don't know. Anyways, hopefully that's not too distracting. So yeah, we're going to be looking to fill those other pillars of the game, like that exploration pillar, the social pillar. Also, like a lot of the investigation type work obviously is going to fall into this character. But in combat, you also have a lot of good crowd control effects. If you look at the Great Old One spell list, there's a lot of abilities along those lines. And, you know, just because we're not going to be a damage dealing character in combat necessarily, we could be, you know, there's nothing stopping you from taking Eldritch Blast with Agonizing Blast. I just don't think you need to. And that's what's nice about this character. But you still have an important role in combat. You can be that crowd control type of guy. So, as for why multi-class, because honestly, you could play a wizard and play like this, and I think it'd be great. You could play a warlock like this, and I think it'd be great. But warlocks really benefit from multi-classing with other casters because of the mechanics of pact magic. Because pact magic automatically scales whether you wanted it to or not, it means that a lot of spells that are great as a wizard or a sorcerer or a bard might not be so good on a warlock. You know, like my go-to example is always Shield. Shield's a great first level spell. It's a bad 5th level spell. And by combining the wizard levels in there, you now have the option of picking and choosing. And what pact magic is usually a bit of a liability, but now it becomes a strength because you have spells you can get back on a short rest, and you have spells you get back on a long rest, and you can pick and choose whether or not to use your warlock spells with your wizard spell slots and your wizard ones with your warlock ones. You know, it just allows you to mix and match and really get the best of both worlds. So, we already know we're going to be going Great Old One. What about the wizard subclasses? Now, I'm not going to say that any of the subclasses are necessarily bad, but obviously for this particular character, some are going to be better than others. Like, for example, the Conjurer Wizard is an excellent subclass of Wizard. Nothing wrong with Conjurer. Jeez. But their best abilities tend to be their high-level ones. At level 10, you get that ability where you don't lose concentration on your summon spells as a result of damage. You don't even have to make a concentration check. That's excellent, but you don't get it to level 10. And if you're multi-classing with Warlock, you're not going to get it until even later, right? Your level 14 ability, all your summons get bonus hit points. But again, that's level 14, and multi-class, you're looking at even later. These are like big long-term investments, if you even take that many levels of Wizard, which you might not. So I do think that like the Necromancy School isn't so bad. Your level 2 ability, you're probably not going to be getting a lot of use out of the Grim Harvest. But getting Animate Dead for free at level 6 is pretty nice. All your skeletons and zombies doing bonus damage is pretty nice. And it does kind of have that like occult type feel to it, where you're like delving into forbidden knowledge. And yeah, the great old ones aren't really the necromancy type. They're more the exploration of the things that people shouldn't know about type. But I still feel like it's not a bad mix. Transmutation isn't bad as well. You know, the Philosopher's Stone thing is pretty good. It gives you some, you know, really nice utility and stuff. Again, it's level 6 ability. But the more I looked at it, I felt the real standout had to be the Diviner Wizard. With only 2 levels, you get Portent. And Portent is an amazing ability. I mean, the Portent dice can just be such a game changer, especially if you roll in the extreme high or extreme low. But even middle of the pack rolls, like an 8 or a 10 or a 12, these are still pretty good rolls if you're confident that somebody doesn't have a strong saving throw in that area. And as you level up and your spellcasting DC gets to be really good, you know, if you have a spellcasting DC of 17, for example, right, or 18 or 19 or whatever, let's say 17, and you give somebody a 10 on their saving throw, they need to have a +7 to pass. Now, if you were hitting a cleric with something that gives a wisdom save, odds are you probably know that, yeah, they're probably going to pass that. That's probably a bad choice. But if you're giving some dumb brute type a 10, they're probably not going to have a +7. And it's just going to be an automatic failure for them. So that's pretty potent. The other thing I really like is at level 6 you gain the ability where if you cast a divination spell, you can recover a lost spell slot. This can be really powerful if you cast a divination spell with one of your pact slots that's going to come back on a short rest anyways, and then use it to recover a long rest spell slot instead. So now, let's say you cast an Arcane Eye, for example, which is a great scouting tool. So you use your pact slot, cast Arcane Eye, and then recover, say, your 3rd level counterspell that you used in the fight before. Now you've got your counterspell back, you've got an Arcane Eye that you can scout with, and that pact slot's going to come back on your next short rest anyways. So it really allows you to like really start making some abusive decisions there, which I like. So I think that's a really strong combination, and it doesn't require a lot of wizard levels. Now, I think one of the strengths of this build is that you could take more wizard levels if you want. There's really it's going to be up to you. It's going to be like looking at the spell list and deciding which spells do you really want to use. But I feel like the great old ones have some pretty good class abilities. And Diviner tends to be one of these front-loaded classes. Now maybe you wanted to go to 7th or 9th level just to get 4th or 5th level spells. That's fine. But I think 6 levels works perfectly well. Get your Portent dice, recover your spell slots when you use a divination spell, and all the rest is Warlock. And I think that's perfectly fine. So let's take a look at the Great Old One Warlock. We'll start with their spell list. Now, the Warlock spell lists aren't like a cleric, right? They're not like domain spells. So your patron spells are just added to the spells you can learn, but you still have to use that as a spell choice. It's not like a cleric where, you know, let's say you went with a trickery domain cleric and you've got Pass Without Trace and Polymorph on your list. You automatically have those spells as a cleric once you reach the appropriate level to cast them. Right? You didn't have to learn Polymorph. You just have Polymorph as soon as you have 4th level spells. So that's not the way it goes with Warlock. Those spells just get added to the list and then you can choose them. But that said, I think there's some excellent spells on the Great Old One spell list for you to choose from. So your 1st level spells, you get Dissonant Whisper and Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Both good crowd control type effects, right? A 2nd level spells, you get Detect Thoughts and Phantasmal Force. Detect Thoughts especially is excellent for that investigation type role. Third level spells, Clairvoyance and Sending. Again, Clairvoyance is going to help us to fill the investigation role. Sending is just nice for communication. It's a pretty decent spell in general. Fourth level spells, Dominate Beast and Evard's Black Tentacles. So again, more of that crowd control type abilities, and in the case of Dominate Beast, even like a control ability. And Evard's Black Tentacle is just an excellent CC with a bit of damage on top of it. It's a great spell. Fifth level spells, you get Dominate Person and Telekinesis. Dominate Person especially, more crowd control, and, you know, pretty strong spell in general, to be honest. So I feel like there's some good choices for us to choose from. You don't have to take all of them, but I think that, you know, picking a few select ones that are going to fit into what you want to play, I think there's nothing wrong with that. There's some excellent spells to choose from there. As far as the Great Old One abilities, at level 1 you have Awakened Mind. That's one where you can telepathically send messages to anybody within 30 feet of you. They have to be able to understand a language, but you don't have to share the language with them. So that's good. I mean, you can't communicate with plants because they don't have a language. Sorry, you're not a druid. But, you know, you can talk to goblins or trolls or whatever else you might happen to find that you just don't speak their language, and you can send communications to them. It's excellent as well in like certain social situations where you want to tell your buddies something, but you don't want everybody to overhear you. You can just project those thoughts straight to their brain. So excellent. Level 6, Entropic Ward. This ability, I wouldn't say it's great, but I don't think it's bad either. It's kind of like a mid-tier. Basically, when a creature makes an attack roll against you, you can use your reaction to impose disadvantage on that roll. If the attack misses you, your next attack roll against that creature has advantage if you make it before the end of your next turn. You can only use it once per long or short rest. The problem is, like, if you're going to be like more of a melee character, which, by the way, there's nothing stopping you from making like a Great Old One Warlock who wants to be a melee character and combine it with like Blade Singer or War Mage or something along those lines. I think that adding Eldritch Smite to Blade Singing gives you a lot of really, really strong possibilities. That's just not this particular character. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about those. But in general, I feel like Entropic Ward isn't great if you're going to be in melee because it's only once per long or short rest, and you're probably going to get focused a lot. But if you're playing a caster who just wants to sit at the back and cast spells on stuff, then using Entropic Ward to give somebody disadvantage if you're worried about making a key concentration roll is an excellent ability, because now you give them disadvantage, they might miss you, you never even have to make the concentration check. And if you're in the back and you're only getting focused, you might only get attacked 2 or 3 times between short rests. So let's say you get attacked 3 times between short rests. You manage to give disadvantage to 1/3 of those attacks. You know, that's actually pretty strong. This is why I say it's not a bad ability. I don't think it's a great ability either. But, you know, there's definitely worse out there. And it can be very clutch at the right time if you have something you're trying to preserve with your concentration. Level 10, you get Thought Shield. Nobody can read your mind unless you want them to. You also get resistance to psychic damage, and whenever a creature deals psychic damage to you, that creature takes the same amount of damage that you do. Now, unfortunately, you have resistance, so you're only taking half damage, so you're only reflecting half damage. I wish they took like the full amount of damage and you took half. That'd be even better. But, you know, it's not bad. Again, psychic damage isn't the most common damage type out there, so I don't know how much mileage you're going to get from this ability. But it's not terrible. And all the Warlocks, their level 10 ability seems to be like resistance to something, right? So I think it's pretty much in line with that. Create Thrall. This one's a really polarizing ability. Some people love it. Some people think it's just absolute garbage. I think it's decent, but depending on how well you use it, you can get a lot of mileage out of it. And that could be an amazing ability under the right circumstances. So use your action to touch an incapacitated humanoid. That creature is then charmed by you until a remove curse spell is cast on it. The charmed condition is removed from it, or you use this feature again. You can communicate telepathically with the charmed creature as long as the two of you are on the same plane of existence. So a lot of people kind of overestimate what charmed is. It really just means that they're kind of friendly to you and you can get advantage on certain rolls. But they don't. You don't control their mind. You know, you can't just force them to do whatever you want them to. So a lot of people who tend to think that it's like mind control think it's excellent. On the other hand, there's a lot of people who are probably focusing more on the combat aspects of this, who are like, well, they have to be incapacitated already. So, you know, if we've already incapacitated this guy, why do I need to charm him, right? But, you know, that's where you get creative. Like, who says you have to use it in combat? Maybe you use gaseous form to sneak into the king's bedchambers at night, touch him while he's asleep. Now he's like your buddy, and then you just sneak out the same way, gaseous form, either spell or potion or whatever you had to use to get there. And, you know, now the king is your friend. And yeah, you don't mentally control the king, but you have a lot of influence with him, and suddenly he just wants to pal around with you and thinks you're a cool guy. And, you know, I'm sure clever players can find many ways to abuse those kind of things. So I feel like there's a lot of good, like, roleplay type potential with that. And just as a quick aside, in one of my campaigns, it was actually like a Lovecraftian horror type campaign. I just called it King in Yellow. Well, I mean, the main villain, I guess, was ultimately the King in Yellow, but the players never had to fight him. They fought his minion, the Golden Queen, and there's a bard NPC who used to be on, like, teamed up with some other NPCs, but she, like, brought him over to her side. And the players never really investigated it. They just kind of knew that she, like, seduced him to the dark side, quote unquote, the yellow side, whatever. And what really happened is he was just kind of a man whore, had sex with this super hot looking warlock chick who ended up being a level 20 warlock, it turned out, because this was a very high level campaign. And then while he was asleep, she turned him into her thrall. So, you know, he switched teams instead of playing for Team Yellow instead of Team White. The players never really found that out or cared, but for me personally, I liked having, you know, in-game mechanics to explain what had happened there, right? So it is a pretty cool ability. It's no hurl through hell, you know. Nobody reads hurl through hell and thinks, man, when would I ever use this? You know, that ability is just amazing. Everybody knows it's amazing. So yeah, if you're comparing it to this, obviously it's not going to be as good. But there are some really clever uses for it that, you know, smart players could definitely abuse. And I'm all in favor of that kind of stuff. So going along with this, like, occult investigator type of character, I think if we look at some of the different invocations and spells and maybe feats, that's probably we're going to go from here, and we'll round out the video with that kind of stuff. Let's start with invocations. There's a number of really good ones. I was going to say, you could take something like the Book of Ancient Secrets if you go Path to the Tome. Now, you already will have ritual spellcasting from combining your class with Wizard. And you could, you know, get familiar with Path to the Tome, so, you know, or from Wizard. So you don't really even need to go Path to the Tome. But I do kind of like that Lovecraftian aspect where a lot of times there's like these forbidden books of knowledge, and now you've got this book that you carry around with you and you scribe all this stuff. And there are a lot of real upsides to it, because as a wizard, you're only going to have the wizard rituals. But with this, with your Book of Ancient Secrets, you can get like druid rituals and cleric rituals. You can get rituals from every class in the game. And that can be pretty handy, especially if you have a lot of warlock levels. Then you're going to be able to, you know, scribe even high level rituals. So I think that there's some really good potential there. But number two, it means that if you don't want to go with Path to the Tome, you don't have to, because you're going to get ritual casting from Wizard. And maybe you just take some low level Wizard rituals, or if you go to, like, let's say 6th or 7th level Wizard, you can still get things like Instant Hut, you know, or a Tiny Hut, sorry. You can get Find Familiar, you can get Alarm, you know, there's a bunch of other spells that you can get, which are pretty decent. So you don't even need a lot of Wizard levels. You can just get the ritual magic from there, and then you go with like Pact of the Chain or something, and you get a even better familiar, and you know, use that. So I think there's some real potential there, but you don't have to do it either way, right? So I think it's decent though. Eldritch Site is a pretty interesting one. This is one I usually don't think of taking, to be honest, but if I want to play that Occult Investigator, I think it's pretty good. You get Detect Magic at will without expending a spell slot. So, I mean, there's no reason you couldn't just literally have your Eldritch Sight on permanently all the time. As long as you're awake, you're just detecting magic, you know? and just tell the dungeon master, yeah, I'm just permanently detecting magic. I'm a magic detecting radar machine. And that can be pretty handy. A lot of times you use detect magic as a ritual, but it's because you suspect there's something there. This helps you to find something even when nobody suspected there was something there, which is just way better, honestly. From Xanatar's Guide to Everything, there's the Ghostly Gaze. This can give you dark vision if you didn't already have it, but more importantly, it lets you see through walls, and that can be pretty handy, needless to say. So I think that's another one where, imagine if you could see through walls and detect magic. Already you've got an investigation type character who's essentially got X-ray vision, and can detect magic everywhere around them at will, essentially. Already you probably start seeing the potential for this kind of character to really, really frustrate a dungeon master or two. Another one that I like a lot is Eyes of the Rune Keeper. This is the one where you can read all writing. And I don't know that it's necessarily the greatest ability out there, but a lot of adventurers do have like weird cryptic writing that's written in some crazy language and nobody in the party knows how to read it. You don't have to worry about that. You can just read every type of writing. And that is pretty nice. It probably wouldn't be one of the first ones I picked up, but it is a pretty good ability, so it is one that I'd probably grab it at some point. And then the last one that really stuck out to me was Visions of Distant Realms. And you can cast Arcane Eye at will without expending a spell slot. The only problem with this one is you have to be 15th level as a Warlock in order to be able to use it. So that's a pretty mighty big investment. It might just be easier to take Arcane Eye from your Wizard spell list if you went to 7 levels of Wizard, for example. But maybe you only wanted a few levels of Wizard, in which case, by all means, grab this, because Arcane Eye is an excellent scouting tool. So I feel like those are probably the invocations that stick out to me the most. And like I said, there's nothing stopping you from still taking like an Elder's Blast with an Agonizing Blast, or a Repelling Blast, or a Grasp of Vidar, or any of those kind of things, right? You could take Cloak of Flies or whatever else you want. But I think as far as the investigation type role goes, there's a lot of really, really good options on that list, as you can see. You can take something like Devil's Sight if you went with human, To be honest, I think if you're looking at charisma and intelligence, then something like the Tiefling or the Half-Elf are probably going to be like from an optimization standpoint, they're probably going to be your best choices. But, Variant Human is always strong as well. Start with a feat. Hard to go wrong. +1 to 2 different stats of your choice. It is pretty good. So as far as spells go, and a bunch of these appear on the Great Old One expanded spell list, so you can just take them off that spell list. There are a few that don't, but, that's why you got wizard levels. Detect Thoughts is obviously one of the best ones. That's on your spell list. Clairvoyance, another good one from your spell list. Dominate Person, also on your spell list. I like Invisibility, and if you go high enough, then Greater Invisibility, obviously good choices. But if you want to be kind of like that sneaky investigator type, then Invisibility is very important. I already mentioned Gaseous Form. I think Gaseous Form is a very underrated spell or ability. It's really good for even scouting dungeons and stuff. If you're worried you might have gone the wrong way or whatever, right? Just go to Gaseous Form and scout it out for the party, or use an Arcane Eye and do that kind of stuff. I've been in groups where people just cast Arcane Eye and literally scouted the entire top floor of the dungeon before we ever started even killing the first creature, It's kind of ridiculous, but it's there, so you might as well abuse it. I think Fly is just a great spell in general, and if you're trying to reach places that are otherwise hard to reach, Fly is a good choice for that. Obviously, Dispel Magic, and Counterspell is just a great spell in general. I'd probably always take Counterspell if it's on a spell list. I like the Suggestion spell. You're probably not going to get high enough for Mass Suggestion. Maybe you will, who knows? But if you do, Mass Suggestion, great choice. But Suggestion's pretty low level, and it's a really strong option. As far as more combat type spells, I like Enemies Abound is, interesting. And if you get high enough to cast Synaptic Static, then doing psychic damage is pretty good. Psychic Scream, if you get all the way to 9th level spell slots, is also a lot of psychic damage and pretty cool. And, you know, it kind of fits the whole theme, you down just projecting psychic energy into your enemies. It's kind of nice. But I really like a lot of the investigation type things off that spell list. I'm sure there's a bunch that I missed as well that you could add in or take. And I think most of those are pretty good. As far as feats go, there's not really a lot of feats that fit this role, but I do think that Observant at least is worth mentioning. You get the passive perception bonus, and if you're trying to be like, you also get stat bonus, you know, which is nice as well. But like if you're trying to be that investigation, problem solving type of guy, passive perception is pretty nice to have. I think the Keen Mind feat, well, I don't know that it's a great feat necessarily, but you do get +1 intelligence with it. And so if you had an odd number intelligence, that's not a bad way to, you know, to get up to the next level, get your next modifier bonus. And, you know, the fact that you know what time it is and know when, you know, what direction you're facing and stuff like that isn't bad. But mostly the photographic memory aspect, the eidetic memory, is the real bonus there, I think. Because a lot of times you, like, your player comes across something, or you read something, or you see something, and then you as a player didn't think to like write it down because you didn't know it was going to be important, and then later it ends up being important, and the dungeon master is like, just sits back with that smug look and is like, oh well, I guess you don't remember the phrase then, do you? And you're like, wait a minute, my character read the phrase and I have perfect recall. And they're like, that's right, you do. Okay, that was the phrase. There you go. You know, and you're like, oh, thank you. So, you know, that kind of stuff can be fun. So do I think Keen Mind is a great feat? Not necessarily. But I do think that, you know, there might be room for it. If you needed the stat bonus especially, I think it can be good. But just in general, it has its moments. So those are my main thoughts on this class combination. I think that there's a lot of, like, the portent dice especially, combined with a lot of the Warlock abilities, can be pretty handy. Like there's so many things you can do with portent. It's just such an amazing ability. And like I said, just taking a few levels of Wizard, even if all you took is 2 levels just for portent, and some first level spell slots that you can use things like Shield spell with, because you can take Shield from your Wizard spell list, you know? I think there's some real benefits there. And if you wanted more levels of Wizard, that's fine too. But 2 levels of Wizard is going to give you your subclass, it's going to give you your portent dice, it's going to give you those first level spell slots that recharge on a long rest that you can now, you know, mix and match with your packed slots. And it's still going to allow you to get to potentially 9th level spells on a Warlock. And like I said, if you wanted to do it the other way and just grab some of the basic Warlock abilities, maybe you just wanted to grab things like Armor of Agathis and get your telepathy from like first level type abilities, and maybe grab a couple things along those lines and go mostly Wizard. I think that works fine too. And so I think it's a very flexible type of build. My only advice would be, usually I find that if I'm multi-class of Wizard, I either want just a bit of Wizard or I want almost all Wizard. Wizard, with a couple exceptions, generally doesn't do well as like a half and half type thing. Just because your high level spell slots are really powerful on Wizard, you've got probably the best spell list on the game, let's be honest. At least when you consider all levels. Like Clerics have an excellent spell list, so do Druids, but they both tend to be focused more on the mid and low level spells. Whereas like when you start hitting like 7th, 8th, and 9th level spells, like Wizards are getting like Force Cage and Simulacrum and Maze and Wish. Like it's ridiculous some of the spells that you start getting, right? So I think from that perspective, Wizards have one of the best spell lists there is. So you either want a lot of that or you want very little. Because the other problem is with Wizard that the more of something else you take, the more it just regresses your progression, right? It takes forever for you to start getting your good spell slots. But that's why I say, I think a couple levels of Wizard could really go a long way in this type of build. And then you just focus more on your investigation type stuff, while also getting a lot of like nice crowd control type abilities for combat. So it's like I said, it's not like you can't participate in combat. You're still pretty good at it. You're just not going to be focusing on, you know, 1,001 things to do with Eldritch Blast. Which, by the way, is fine too if that's what characters want to do. I'm just saying that you can do something else besides that. So anyways, those are my thoughts. I think the Occult Investigator seems like he'd probably be a lot of fun. This is the kind of character I'd love to play in a campaign at some point. But whatever, give me your thoughts, your suggestions, your feedback. Feel free to like, subscribe, and of course, mostly, as I always say, leave me your comments in the comment section. That's what I look forward to most. And I'll see you next time in the dungeon. Bye.